So we have completed the chapter of audit report. Other than section 143, which is a law-based thing that you are going to study in law. Okay. Now, we will see one more chapter first, one small chapter, and after seeing this small chapter, we'll go through the related standards on these topics. So we'll go through one small chapter again, and we'll go through the related standards of these topics. So again, the next topic we are going to do, ethics and terms of audit engagement. Ethics and terms of audit engagement, chapter number 3. Chapter number 3, ethics and terms of audit engagement. Again, let me clarify. In the study module, you will see that this is chapter number 11. That is ethics and terms. They have given us chapter number 11. But I have made it chapter number 3 because this very topic is the base of audit. This very chapter is the base of audit. It makes no sense that we have to study that at last. This particular topic should be studied on the initial stage. So that is why I have made it chapter number 3. In the module, it is chapter number 11. Clear? So particularly ethics and terms of audit engagement. So now, in this particular chapter, what we have to study, again, we are studying the chapter part, the standards part, we shall be doing separately in the standards of auditing chapter. Once after doing this chapter, we shall be proceeding towards the relevant standards of auditing that is, meant for these chapters. Okay. So ethics and terms of audit engagement. So again, a very logical thing. First of all, when we talk about ethics, what do you mean by ethics? When you talk about ethics, what do you mean by ethics? Tell me, what do you understand? What do you mean by ethics? Morals, right? Ethics means morals. Very good. Ethics means morals. The set of morals, right? Anything more? Principles, right? Ethics are principles. Ethics are principles. You are seeing and telling or without seeing? Huh? Without seeing, okay. So ethics are morals, right? Ethics are principles. Okay. Someone else, what is ethics? What do you understand? What is ethics? Set of rules. Okay, ethics are set of rules. You can say set of rules. These are set of rules. So 3 words you have told me. Ethics are morals. Ethics are set of principles. Ethics are set of rules. Anything more? What is ethics? Something which is not there in the book also. Something might be, it might not be there in the books. It's okay. What is ethics? Ethics simply means what is right and what is wrong. Ethics simply means what is right and what is wrong. So someone said morals, someone said principles, someone said rules. But these morals, these principles, these rules, in what it is helping us? To decide what is right and what is wrong. These morals, these principles, this particular rules, it is helping us in deciding what is right and what is wrong. It is a set of principles. It is a set of rules. It is a set of morals that is imposed upon individuals, which guides his behavior because he believes what is right and what is wrong. Right? For example, let us say a particular section of the society, they prefer that what they believe, that eating non-veg is a sin. But the other section of the society, they feel that it is normal. There is nothing wrong in that. So the same thing, it is ethical for someone, it is unethical for someone. The persons who believe that eating non-veg is a sin, for them, it is a set of rules, it is a set of morals that imposes an obligation upon them that they will never touch that because they feel that it is unethical. They will feel that it is wrong. On the other hand, for others, it may be ethical. On the other hand, it may be ethical for the others. Right? For example, let us say in your house, maybe you wake up at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning when there is no class. But might be your Dadaji, or someone in your house. They might wake up at 5 o'clock. For them, what they believe is that, waking up early, that is correct. That is ethical. They will say that, waking up late is very wrong. A simple example, but it is ethical for them to wake up early. So that particular principle is reflected in their behavior. It becomes a set of obligation for them. They will accordingly wake up early only. Wearing a particular type of dress, using particular category of words. For someone, it may be totally fine to use some special words of C category and all of that. But for others, it may be a crime. For others, it may be wrong. Right? So, what are ethics? Ethics are a set of principles. Ethics are a set of morals. Ethics are a set of rules that govern a person's behavior. And that imposes an obligation upon the individual and helps him in deciding what is right and what is wrong. Now, ethics also, now there are two types. Right? Ethics also, there are two things. One is universal rules of ethics. One is universal rules of ethics. And another is the rules individual has made for himself. So there are some universal rules for ethics. You are not supposed to murder anyone. You are not supposed to harm anyone. You are not supposed to steal anything. These are universal rule of ethics. So these are the set of principles, these are the set of morals, these are the set of rules that is applicable for everyone out there. But on the other hand, there are set of principles, there are set of rules that the person makes for himself. For example, that veg non-veg thing, that early morning thing, that choice of words thing, that he sets for himself. Clear? That is ethics. Now, in this particular chapter, we are not going to talk about ethics. That ethics you were taught in your childhood, in your moral science subject. Now we are going to talk about professional ethics. We are going to talk about professional ethics and general introduction of professional ethics. So when we say that ethics is very important in the personal life of an individual, similarly, ethics is very important for every profession. You can say that ethics is the soul of any profession. If any particular profession does not have its ethics, it's just like that soul of that profession is being killed. For example, doctors, they have their own set of ethics. They cannot prescribe wrong medicines. It is ethical, it is unethical for them. Their profession ethics says that it is unethical for them to prescribe wrong medicines. It is unethical for them to take exorbitant, charges. It is unethical for them, their set of ethics. Maybe you go for a surgery and instead of doing your proper surgery, they take your kidney out and sell in the market. It is unethical. It is unethical. You go to a doctor, you share your certain confidential information. It is unethical for them to go and reveal it out in the market. Similarly, even our institute, the ICAI, they have also set up their ethics. And in our profession, the requirement of ethics matters the most. Why? Because we are one of the professions that we are accountable not towards a particular individual. We are accountable towards the society as a whole. We are accountable towards the users of financial statement as a whole. The chartered accountants are accountable towards various sectors of society, like the government, the investors, the bankers, the shareholders, the employees. Clear? And they have tremendous trust on the chartered accountants. They have tremendous faith on the chartered accountants. They are relying on the audited financial statements issued by the chartered accountants. And so it is very important that we have to be ethical. It is very important that we have to be ethical. And so ICAI has issued certain ethical principles. ICAI has issued code of ethics, which every chartered accountant is expected to follow. Now in your CA inter audit, you are not expected to know the code of ethics. You are just expected to know the general principles of ethics. When you'll go in CA final, then you'll be expected to know the code of ethics. Then ICAI will teach you in details what are the code of ethics. Right now, the objective is to educate us with the basic principles that you have to be ethical. And if you are not ethical, as a chartered accountant, if you are not ethical, then what will happen? Particularly, see, if you're not being ethical, at your house, in your house a rule is being made that you have to come house by, let us say, 10:30, but on a regular basis you are going house at 2 o'clock, then what will happen? Your mother, your father will take action against you. Similarly, here, if you're not being ethical, if you're not following the code of ethics given by the ICAI, you are not being ethical, then ICAI will take action against you. ICAI will take disciplinary action against you. ICAI may impose fines on you, ICAI may impose penalties on you, and in the worst possible case scenario, ICAI may also remove the designation chartered accountant. ICAI may also take your degree back, which you have earned after a lot of efforts, which you have earned after a lot of hard work. So that also the ICAI can do. So these first two paragraphs, this is basically just for reading. Chances in to come in exam are very less. But yes, we should read once. What is the need for ethics? What is the meaning of ethics? What is the need for professional ethics? Clear? What is the meaning of ethics and what are the needs of professional ethics? So meaning of ethics, what is the meaning of ethics? So they have given the term ethics means moral principles which governs a person's behavior or his conducting of an activity. It is the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. It is the science of morals in human conduct. And such moral principles and rules of conduct impose obligations upon individuals. What is the need for professional ethics? The professions like law, medicine have their own code of ethics. Auditing profession is no exception. Rather, in the field of auditing, requirement of ethics is manifold. Means, the requirement of ethics is even much more than the other professions. It is due to the reason that in general, governments, clients, taxation authorities, employees, investors, the business, the finance communities have reposed tremendous trust in services rendered by chartered accountants. The purpose of assurance engagement is to enhance confidence of the intended users. The purpose of the assurance engagement is to enhance the confidence of the intended users. And therefore, users need to trust the person who is providing such services. And when will be the users trust us? When will be ethical? A chartered accountant, either in practice or service, has to abide by the ethical behaviors. They are expected to follow the fundamental principles of code of ethics. And you know what are the fundamental principles of code of ethics? OIPCC, right? The fundamental principles of code of ethics is OIPCC that we studied in the basic class. Objectivity, integrity, confidentiality, competence and due care, and yeah, professional behavior, right? Any deviation from the ethical requirements brings the disciplinary mechanism into action against the chartered accountants, which may result into fines, suspension of membership, removal from membership, or other disciplinary actions. And let me tell you one more thing. It is not written, but let me tell you one more thing. In today's world, ICAI is not the only authority to take disciplinary action against the chartered accountants. There is one more authority which has the power to take disciplinary action against you, and that is NFRA. That is NFRA. So even the NFRA has the power to take disciplinary action against the chartered accountants. As of today, only ICAI does not have the power. Even NFRA has the power. Yeah. Okay. Now there comes one question. What are the different approaches to ethics? There are two approaches to ethics. One is a principle-based approach, another is a rule-based approach. There are two approaches. One is a principle-based approach, another is a rule-based approach. Now see, what is a rule-based approach? Rule-based approach is, I ask someone said ethics means rules. Someone said me ethics means rules. And someone said me ethics means morals. Now someone told me ethics means rules. It means whatever is given in the rules will follow. What is the rule-based approach? Whatever is given in the rule will follow. What is not given in the rule, we are not bothered. If anything is given in the rule, will follow. And if anything is not given in the rule, we are not bothered. Clear? That is called a rule-based approach. Strictly abiding rules. Strictly abiding rules. That will follow the rules. If anything is given in the rules, will strictly follow what is given in the rules. But if anything is not given in the rules, then in that case, we don't care. In that case, we don't care. And another is the principle-based approach. What is the principle-based approach? Principle-based approach is basically here we are not bothered about the rules. Here we are not bothered about the rules. Here we simply try to be ethical in every situation. Here we simply try to be ethical in every situation. In every situation, we try to be ethical. In every situation, we try to take a correct action. In every situation, we try to take a corrective action. In every situation, we try to apply our judgment and decide what is ethical, what is not ethical. In every situation, we apply our judgment and we decide what is ethical and what is not ethical. See. So now rule-based approach. Let us say when we talk about Income Tax Act. So basically when you follow a rule-based approach, what you do is you are always confined to what is written in the rules. If something is there in the rules, you go by the rules. But if anything is not there in the rules, you try to avoid taxes. You try to save taxes. You try to, pay less taxes to the government. But if a principle-based approach is there, and suppose you said in your mind, no, whatever money I earn, I should pay taxes to the government. It is wrong that I hide that, if I hide my revenue. So whatever money I'm going to earn, I'm going to pay taxes. That is the principle-based approach. You are not going by the rules. You have simply decided that I have to be correct in every scenario. In other words, you see, rule-based approach means what? You are just following the rules. But principle-based approach, what happens, you have to be ethical in every situation. See, it is very easy to be ethical when the world is watching you. It is very easy to be ethical when the world is watching you. It is most difficult to be ethical when the world is not watching you, when no one is watching you. Being ethical even at those times is called as principle-based ethics. In your exam hall, you are giving the examination. The book is near you. The book is near you, you don't know a question. The examiner is not there. No one is bothered. You easily have that opportunity. You can take the book, you can see the answer, and you can write. Now, even if you are not being, even if you are committed that no, I will not cheat, and you are ethical at that point of time also, that is a principle-based approach. Being ethical when no one is watching you. Exercise judgment in every situation and decide what is ethical, what is not ethical. So tell me which is a better approach, principle-based approach or rule-based approach? Principle-based. Principle-based approach is a better approach. For you to serve your personal interest, rule-based approach may be a better approach. But for the society as a whole, principle-based approach is a better approach. It is a much wider approach. Because you have decided that I will not be ethical. And if you have decided that you have decided that I will not be unethical. And if you have decided that I'll always be ethical, then you are bound always to be ethical. So but in the rule-based approach, your focus will be only compliance towards the rules. And rules cannot be made for each and everything. Rules can never be made for each and everything. Irrespective of how many situations you think of and the rules you made. But still there will be situations in life in which there will be nothing given in the rules. And there what is going to help you? Principle-based approach. So ethical guidance may follow principle-based approach or rules-based approach. Okay. The essence of principle-based approach to ethics is that it requires compliance with the spirit of ethics. Underline the word spirit of ethics. The essence of principle-based approach is that it requires compliance with the spirit of ethics. It requires accountants to exercise professional judgment in every situation based on their professional knowledge, skill, and expertise. That you have to exercise judgment in every situation based on the knowledge, skill, and expertise. It requires that accountant should use professional judgment to evaluate every situation to arrive at conclusion. So what you should do is you should exercise your professional judgment at every situation to come at conclusion and decide what is ethical, what is not ethical. Then we have rule-based approach. What is the rule-based approach? See, but practically it is very difficult to implement, Principle-based approach, what will happen? Client will say, I will give you 10 lakh rupees. I will give you 10 lakh rupees. Just particularly help me in hiding the books of accounts, in hiding the incomes in the books of accounts. Particularly don't report this. So if you are following the principle-based approach, you will say, no. I will not help with you. I will not help you. It is wrong. But if you're following rules-based approach, your mind will be only that, okay, how can I help my client? And at the same time, how can I abide with the rules? But if you're following the principle-based approach, it is like, no, 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 I will not allow you to do wrong. I will not support you in doing wrong. That is the principle-based approach. However, rule-based approach to ethics strictly follows clearly established rules. It may lead to a narrow outlook. It may lead to a narrow outlook. And the spirit of ethics may be overlooked. The spirit of ethics may be overlooked while strictly abiding to the rules. Further, rules-based approach is somewhat rigid, as it may not be possible to deal with every practical situation, applying the rules. It is not possible to deal with every practical situation. Therefore, it is necessary that what you follow? Spirit of code of ethics. What you follow? Spirit of code of ethics. Just two words are missing here. Therefore, it is necessary that spirit of code of ethics is followed. Spirit of code of ethics is followed. Okay. Then we have fundamental principles of professional ethics. So what are the fundamental principles? The 5 principles. Yeah, OIPCC. So O stands for objectivity. Objectivity means that you should not be biased. Objectivity, you have to remember 3 things. First is professional accountant should not be biased. Second is there should be no conflict of interest. Second is there should be no conflict of interest. And third is you should not work under anyone's undue influence. You should not work under anyone's undue influence. Examples: professional accountant should not be biased. So in any particular scenario, you must not be biased towards the client. You must not be biased towards the client, right? You must be unbiased. You must be neutral. So there might be situations in which you might become biased towards the client. For example, you are also having some business relationship with the client. You are also having some business relationship with the client. Now, if you know that if you don't issue the audit report as per the wishes of the client, your business relationship may be compromised. So you might be simply be biased towards the client. We have to ensure that you are not biased. You have to ensure that you are not biased. Secondly, there should be no conflict of interest. For example, you are only preparing the books of accounts of the client and you are only doing the audit. It is just like ICAI has told you that from now on, you only write your exam papers and you only check your exam papers. It will be like getting 100 out of 100. Right? That you only write your exam papers, you only check your exam papers. So there should be no conflict of interest. And third is, you should not work under anyone undue influence. For example, the company in which you have accepted the audit, let us say your relative, is a director of the company. Your relative is a director of the company, right? In that particular situation, Naren has come. Yeah. So Naren, he was the auditor of the company, right? Let us say Naren's wife is a director of the company. Naren's wife is a director of the company. Now, if he accepts appointment as a auditor in such a company, in that situation, she might influence him, no? Yes, there might be undue influence. There might be undue influence. So, he should not accept such audit. So, objectivity. In objectivity, remember 3 words. First of all, biasness. There should be no biasness. Secondly, no conflict of interest. And third is no undue influence, right? Second we have is IPCC, I for integrity. Integrity simple means honesty. Integrity means simply be honesty. If you know that a particular document is false, if you know that a particular statement is wrong, you should not be associated with such a document. You should always follow the principle of honesty. If you know that a particular statement is wrong, in that particular scenario, you should clearly point out that the particular statement is wrong. If the client has submitted some, if the client in the P&L account has shown some extra expenditures, and you know very nicely those expenditures are not genuine, those expenditures are the fake expenditures. In that particular situation, you should not be associated with such financial statement. You should not support the client in any manner whatsoever. You will never say anything wrong as correct. You will never see anything wrong as correct. What is wrong, you will tell it is wrong. And what is correct, you will tell it is correct. That is what we call as the principle of integrity. being straightforward, being honest, and not being associated with any false statement or false returns when you know that they are false or misleading. So that is what we call as integrity. Clear? The next we have is professional competence and due care. Professional competence and due care. What is professional competence and due care? So professional competence and due care means basically you must have knowledge of the technical and professional standards. You must have the knowledge of the technical and professional standards. Like let us say, let us say, gave you an example. SA 501 says that you should attend the physical verification of inventory whenever the management conducts the physical verification of inventory. After becoming CA, you did not attend the physical verification of inventory done by the management. And why you have not attended? You are saying that, oh, I forgot to study. You know, I left as a 501 in exam. I left as a 501 in exam, and that is why I don't know what is as a 501. So I don't know what is as a 501, so I have not attended. Is that an excuse? No. You should be competent enough. You should have the knowledge of the standards. That is what we mean by being competent. Then we have confidentiality. So again, confidentiality we discussed that you should not disclose any information of the client without his consent or requirement of law. Only there are two exceptions. If the client has given the consent, you can disclose, or if there is any requirement of law, in that situation you can disclose. For example of requirement of law, for example, just now I told you about section 143 subsection 12. So what does section 143 subsection 12 says? That if you have come across a fraud of 1 CR or more, you have to report it about to the CG. Now the client cannot say, oh, this is confidential, please don't disclose. No. Law says to disclose. So when the law says to disclose, it will override the fundamental principles. And then we have professional behavior. What do you mean by professional behavior? Professional behavior means, do remember 2 points. First of all, you have to comply with laws and regulation. Professional behavior means you have to comply with laws and regulations. You have to comply with laws and regulation. And you have to avoid any action that may bring disrepute to ICAI. You have to avoid any action that will bring disrepute to ICAI. So you have to comply with the laws and regulation. You have to comply with the laws and regulation. And secondly, you have to avoid doing anything which might bring a disrepute to ICAI, even in your personal life. Even in your personal life. Let us say, for example, a chartered accountant, he goes into a bar. A chartered accountant, he goes into a bar and he's fully drunk. And he starts engaging in fights. He starts destroying several things. He makes a huge chaos there. Ultimately, when the news come in the market, what people will say? They don't know you. They know chartered accountant. A chartered accountant did this. Let us say what you did. Particularly, you stole someone money. When the news will come, what people will say? Oh, a chartered accountant did this. Let us say you entered into a domestic violence thing. When the news will come, what people will say? Oh, a chartered accountant has done this. It is going to damage the reputation of ICAI. So you are not supposed to do anything which will damage the reputation of ICAI. Clear? This is professional behavior. So these are the 5 fundamental principles of professional ethics. Right. Then we have independence of auditor. What we have? Independence of auditor. So now when we talk about independence, so in the fundamental principles of in the fundamental principles of code of ethics, you can study independence with objectivity. Independence is basically a part of objectivity. Independence is basically a part of objectivity. That you have to be independent. Now, what do you mean by independent? Independent simply means you are not being subordinate to the wishes of others. You are not being subordinate to the wishes of others. There is no one who is exercising an influence over you. There is no one who is exercising a influence over you. You are freely able to express your opinion. You are freely able to express your opinion. There is no one who is exercising a influence upon you. That is what we call as independence. Now let us say, for example, Mr. Anant Ambani, suppose he's a chartered accountant. Mr. Anant Ambani, suppose he's a chartered accountant. Supposingly he's a chartered accountant. Can the Reliance India, can the Reliance Limited appoint Mr. Anant Ambani as the auditor? The answer is no. Why? He will not be independent. There will be a conflict of interest. He will not be independent. There will be a conflict of interest. How can you say that he will not be independent? Basically, what we can say is that, because of the fact that, his relative is one of the major actors of the company or owner of the company, because of that particular fact, he will not be able to work with integrity. He will not be able to work with objectivity. He will not be able to work with integrity. He will not be able to work with objectivity. At the same time, he will not be able to exercise professional skepticism. At the same time, he will not be able to exercise professional skepticism. Right? So, there are three attributes of independence. Do remember, there are three attributes of independence. Three attributes. You can remember it as IPO. Integrity, objectivity, and professional skepticism. There are three attributes of independence. You can remember it as IPO. Integrity, then we can say professional skepticism, and then we can say objectivity. Means all these three has a bearing on independence. All these three has a bearing on independence. Integrity, objectivity, professional skepticism. Okay. Clear? These are the three attributes of independence. Now what they are saying, there are two perspectives of independence of auditor. There are two perspectives of independence of auditor. First one is independence in mind, and second one is independence in appearance. First one is independence of mind, and second one is independence in appearance. Now you see, I asked you one question: why Mr. Anant Ambani should not be the appointed as the auditor? So you told me, sir, basically he will not be independent. Basically he will not be independent. How can you say he will not be independent? Have you gone and scanned the mind of Anant Ambani? No, you have not scanned the mind of Anant Ambani. Might be he is a person who is not getting influenced by the fact that his relative is a doctor. Might be he's independent. But still, when when the outsiders look at the situation, when the outsiders look at the given situation, the general view that they form that he will not be independent. When the outsiders will look at that given scenario, the general view that they will form is he will not be independent. What the outsiders will conclude? That he will not be able to work with integrity, he will not be able to work with objectivity, and his skepticism might be compromised. That is what the outsider will believe when they see that, okay, the relative is working as an auditor. Understood? Or let us say, already a major shareholder of the company, someone who is holding many shares of the company, he is appointed as the auditor. Again, in that particular situation, might be he is independent, but what the outsiders will feel? He is not independent. The outsiders will feel that because he is a shareholder, his integrity, his objectivity, his skepticism might be compromised. That is called as independence in appearance. That is called as independence in appearance. That what will a third party conclude? What will a third party conclude about the independence of auditor? What will a third party conclude about the independence of auditor? Which third party? See, when we are talking about a third party, we are not talking about a rickshaw wala, we are not talking about a auto wala, we are not talking about any random person who is basically any third party, maybe users of the financial statement or anyone who has that knowledge, who can form a judgment. We are not talking about people who don't know what is audit. We are not talking about people who don't know what is financial statements. We are not talking about the people who don't have any knowledge of anything. We are talking about people who, we are talking about any third party who has the knowledge of the whole scenario and who is in a position that he can form any opinion. So if any third party, That is we call any reasonably informed third party. Any reasonable informed third party. Any reasonable third party. Any reasonable informed third party. If the reasonable informed third party, after having knowledge of all the scenario, if he forms a conclusion that no, it is difficult to work with integrity, objectivity, skepticism, that is called independence and appearance. That independence and appearance is being compromised. And if a reasonably informed third party concludes that I don't think there is any issue and the person can work with integrity, objectivity, skepticism, it means independence and appearance exist. Clear? Second scenario. Let us say, again, our auditor Naren, he is appointed as the auditor of the company. You know, particularly, you know who is the director of the company? Who is the director of the company? Let us say, no, here there is a twist. Let us say who is the director of the company. Let us say that particularly, uh, who is your favorite actress? Who is your favorite actress? Samantha. So let us say Samantha is a director of the company. Samantha is a director of the company, right? And this very person, Naren, he loves Samantha from the core of his heart. He loves Samantha from the core of his heart. No one knows about his love, but he knows that he loves Samantha from the core of his heart. And who is appointed as the director? Samantha is the director of the company. Now, if Naren will be appointed as auditor, will now you see, if we talk about Companies Act, independence will not be compromised. Who is Samantha? No one. No relation. What the outsiders will say, no problem. Because according to them, he does not have any relation with her. But Naren knows from his mind that, I'll be influenced. I will not be able to exercise integrity. I will not be able to exercise objectivity, and I will leave skepticism at the box only. All my alertness will go away when I see her. So this he knows. In this particular situation, he should decide that I don't want to be the auditor. That is what we call independence of mind. And both the perspectives are to be followed. Independence of mind and independence in appearance. But let me tell you practically, only independence in appearance is followed. No one is bothered about independence of mind in real world. But technically, you should follow both. Because anyone cannot scan in your mind, no? Anyone cannot scan your mind. So practically, any person who is following the principle-based approach, only he will be following this independence of mind. So there are two interlinked perspectives of independence. One is independence of mind. That is the state of mind. It is the state of mind that permits the provision of an opinion. It is the state of mind that permits the provision of an opinion without being affected by any influences that compromise professional judgment, allowing an individual to act with integrity, objectivity, and professional skepticism. So it is a state of mind that permits the expression of the opinion that without being influenced, that comprises professional judgment. So basically, you can say that independence of mind means the state of mind allowing an individual to act with integrity, objectivity, skepticism. The state of mind that allows an individual to work with integrity, objectivity, and professional skepticism. Then independence in appearance. What is independence in appearance? Avoid all the facts and circumstances. Avoid those facts and circumstances that any reasonably informed third party will say that you are not independent. Avoid those facts and circumstances that any reasonably informed third party will say that you are not independent and you are not able to work with integrity, objectivity, and professional skepticism. For example, if already your relative is a director of the company and you are accepting appointment as an auditor, any reasonably informed third party will conclude that you are not able to work with integrity, objectivity, professional skepticism. So avoid those kinds of facts and circumstances. So avoiding of facts and circumstances that are so significant that a reasonably an informed third party having knowledge of all the relevant information, including the safeguards applied. Now also let me tell you what is safeguards. What is safeguards? First let us complete the paragraph, then I'll tell you what is safeguards. So avoidance of facts and circumstances that are so significant that a reasonably informed third party who has knowledge of all the facts, circumstances, the safeguards applied. would reasonably conclude that whether the firm or the member of assurance team can work with integrity, objectivity, or professional skepticism that has been compromised or not. Clear? Now you see what is safeguard. Safeguard means taking an action to remove the threat. Safeguard means taking an action to remove the threat. For example, let us say you were holding some shares in the company. You were holding some shares in the company. So now that is a fact that if anyone knows, they will tell that, okay, you are a shareholder, you should not be the auditor. But what you have decided that I will sell off my shares. I will become the auditor after selling my shares. So basically, you have taken a safeguard. Basically, you have taken a safeguard to remove those threats. Let us say you were indebted to the company for 10 lakhs. You were indebted to the company for 10 lakhs. You have to repay company 10 lakhs. So that was a threat to independence. Any outsider will say that, he's not independent. But what you have decided, I'm repaying my loan of 10 lakhs. And I'll become the auditor after repaying my loan of 10 lakhs. So basically, you have taken that safeguard. Particularly Niren's wife is a director of the company. Now, both of them has decided that his wife has said that I'm stepping down from the post of director. I'm resigning from the post of director. I will no longer be the director. So basically, they have taken a safeguard. Clear? So independence and appearance says that any reasonably informed third party, when they will have the knowledge to the facts, when they will have the knowledge to all the information, when they will know about the threat to independence, when they will have the knowledge about the safeguards taken, they can easily conclude and decide whether integrity, objectivity, skepticism has been compromised or not. So independence has to exist not only in fact but also in appearance. Relationship between the auditor and client should be such that firstly he himself is satisfied about his client. So first of all, what they are saying, auditor should exercise independence in mind. He should himself be satisfied about his client. Auditor should be satisfied that I can work independently, and then others should be also satisfied that the auditor can work independently. Independence is a state of mind and character of a person. Independence is a state of mind and character of a person. It is a very subjective matter. It is a very subjective matter. Now, particularly, Samantha is a director of the company. Now, whether he will be influenced, whether his independence will be compromised, it is a state of mind and very subjective in nature. One might be independent in some set of circumstances, while another person might feel he is not independent. Samantha is appointed as the director. Niren might feel he is not independent, but Rahul might feel that he is independent. Your wife is appointed as a director of the company. One person might feel he is not independent, but the other person might feel that it's okay. Even if my wife is appointed as the director, it does not make a difference to me. So it depends upon the state of mind. And it is therefore duty of the chartered accountant that he has to determine in every situation whether he can work independently or no. He should not only follow the legal rules, even outside the legal rules. If he feels that he will not be independent, he should not accept the audit. If he feels that there is anything compromising his independence, he should not accept the audit. So this is basically independence. This is basically independence. So just go through uh, this independence of auditor part. Just go through this independence of auditor part. Just go through in 2 minutes. Okay, so you have gone through. You want me to simplify the language of this independence of mind and independence of appearance? Okay. So independence of mind, you write independence of mind. See, if anything you need from my side, if any additional support you need from my side, then do let me know. Because whatever you will tell me, any kind of additional support that I can give from my side, I will give. But you have to let me know, right? So you see, independence of mind. So you can simply remember it is the state of mind where auditor can form his opinion without compromising professional judgment. Without compromising professional judgment. And he can act with integrity, objectivity, and apply professional skepticism. So it is a state of mind where auditor can form his opinion without compromising professional judgment, and he can act with integrity, objectivity, and apply professional skepticism. So independence of mind. Okay. Then second is independence in appearance. So here we can write independence of auditor must appear to exist to all reasonable persons. Independence of auditor must appear to exist to all reasonable persons. Independence in appearance means that if any reasonable and informed third party that you write A, that a reasonable and informed third party having knowledge of all relevant information and safeguards applied can reasonably conclude that the firm's IPO has not been compromised. Firm's IPO has not been compromised. That is integrity, professional skepticism, and objectivity. That any reasonable third party having knowledge of all relevant information and safeguards applied can reasonably conclude that firm's integrity, professional skepticism, and objectivity has not been compromised. So, see, I have not diluted the language totally, because if I dilute the language totally and give you in a very, very simplified manner, you will not get the marks. So, we don't want that you don't get the marks. So, I have made the language simple, but up to an extent that you can manage to get good marks also. Clear? So, independence of auditor must appear to exist to all reasonable persons. Independence in appearance means that if a reasonable and informed third party having knowledge of all relevant information and safeguards applied can reasonably conclude that firm's IPO has not been compromised. So that is what we mean by independence in appearance. That is what we mean by independence in appearance. Clear? And the last topic, threats to independence. The last topic here, threats to independence. That see, when we talk about independence, it is not so easy to be independent. It is very easy for me to say that okay, you have to be independent in your life, this, that. But in practical life, it is not easy to be independent. There are several obstacles that will come in your life. There are several threats that will come in your life and that will stop you from being independent. And there are 5 threats of independence. There are 5 threats to independence. So, what are the 5 threats? What are the 5 threats to independence? So, see, there are 5 threats. First is the self interest threat. Then we have the self review threats. First, we have the self interest threats. Then we have the self review threats. Then we have the familiarity threats. Then we have the advocacy threats. And we have the intimidation threats. So, there are 5 types of threats. So, first one we have the self interest threat. Then we have the self review threat. Then we have the advocacy threat, right? And then we have the intimidation threats. Intimidation threats, right? Yeah, familiarity threats. Familiarity threats. How you can remember? You can remember it normally also. Or how you can remember? You can remember it as there is a threat to self. There is a threat to chef. So basically, chef is having threat from Karina. Chef is having threat from Karina. So chef is under threat. Chef is under threat. There is a threat to chef from Karina. So chef, S for self-interest threat. S for self-interest threat, self-review threat. S for self-interest threat, self-review threat. A for advocacy threat. I for intimidation threat. F for familiarity threat. So there are 5 threats. So who is under threat? Chef. So chef is under threat. So S for self-interest threat. S for self-review threat. A for advocacy threat. I for intimidation threat. F for familiar threat. Right. Clear. So self-interest threat. Self-interest threat. So what is self-interest threat? Self-interest threat occurs, basically what is self-interest threat? That you are having some personal interest in the client. The CA firm is having some personal interest, or the member of the firm is having some personal interest, or the partner of the firm is having some personal interest. What can be a personal interest? For example, what can be a personal interest? What can be a self-interest? For example, let us say you are having your investments in the client. You are having your investments in the client. You have invested in the shares of the client. You have some stake in the company's business. You have some stake in the company's business. So your personal interest will be involved. Your personal interest will be involved and your independence might get affected. Your personal interest will be involved and your independence might get affected. Or might be you are having a business relationship with the client. You are doing business with the client. You are doing business with the client. Company is your major supplier or company is your major customer. Your business relationship is there. It means your interest is involved. So there are some examples that may create self-interest threat. Every example is important because it can come in the MCQ. They will give you a situation and they will ask, identify the type of threat. So circumstances that may create self-interest threat. First of all, direct financial interest or materially significant indirect financial interest in a client. So you are having a direct financial interest. You are having a direct financial interest. Maybe you are holding the shares of the company. Or maybe it's an indirect financial interest. Maybe your wife is holding the shares in the company. Second is loan oblique guaranteed to oblique from the client. You have taken loan from the client or you have given loan to the client. You have given guarantee. You have given guarantee on someone's behalf to the client. There is a self-interest threat. You have taken the loan. Later on you will be issuing a negative report. The client might force you, give me my loan back. There is an interest that has been created. Undue dependence on total fees from a client. Let us say the major fees you get from a particular client. Your major fees you get from a particular client. Let us say total fees you get once a year. In the year. Only one client is giving you 50 lakh fees and remaining all the other 30-40 clients is giving you 50 lakh fees. So you are heavily dependent on fees on that client. So you have your personal interest. Before issuing any negative report, you will always feel that, oh, if I issue a negative report, and what if the client fires me? So particularly you are having your interest because you are dependent on the total fees from a particular client. Or maybe you are having a close business relationship with the client. Then potential employment with the client. Potential employment with the client. For example, potential employment with the client. Maybe your client has promised you. Maybe your client has promised you. What your client has promised you, that let us say after 3 years, 4 years, now you're doing the audit. After 3 years, 4 years, I will also make you CEO of my company. You leave audit that time, I'll make you CEO of the company. So you have that potential employment in mind. That after 3 years, after 4 years, after 2 years, I might become the CEO here. You are having that potential employment in mind. Your self-interest is there. Right. And then contingent fees relating to an assurance engagement. Contingent fees relating to an assurance engagement. What do you mean by this? Contingent fees relating to an assurance engagement. What do you mean by this? Contingent. Contingent means uncertain. It is dependent on something. So maybe particularly, uh, let us say, for example, your client has given you an offer. Your client has given you an offer, or the client regularly raises loans. Client regularly raises loans. Now, maybe client, you have that grid in mind, you have that interest in mind. The client has promised you that in future, when will be needing the loans, in future, when will be needing the loans, will ask you to issue the projected financial statement, will ask you to give assurance on the projected financial statement. So particularly, you have that grid in mind. You have that thing in mind that, okay, in those things, the fees is normally very high. In those things, the fees is normally very high. So you have that thing in mind that later on, when the client will plan for a loan, the client is going to approach me. I'm going to give an assurance about the projected financial statements. And for that, I'm going to get heavy fees from the client. So you have that interest in mind that in future, I will get the assurance work. In future, I will get the assurance work. So I'm saying contingent fees because it is not certain. In future, the client may give you also. In future, the client may not give you also. So contingent fees relating to an assurance engagement. So you can write the example. For example, giving assurance on the projected financial statements. For example, client may hire us to give assurance on the projected financial statements in the future. For example, client may hire us to give assurance on the projected financial statements in the future. Got it? So there are 6 examples that are given. There are 6 examples that is given, 6 circumstances that is given that may create self-interest threat. First is the direct financial interest or indirect financial interest. Second is the loan oblig guarantee. Third is the dependence on total fees. Fourth is the having close business relationship. Fifth then is the potential employment with the client and contingency fees. So do remember one thing, the first 4 points, the first 4 examples, they are the examples related to present. The first 4 examples are the examples related to present. And the last 2 examples are the examples related to future. The last 2 examples are the examples related to future. Then we have self-review threats. We have self-review threats. What is self-review? It is just like self-review is just like you have only given the exam and you are only checking your exam papers. You have only given the exam and you are only checking your exam paper. Basically, you have only formed a judgment. You have only formed a judgment, or you have only reached a conclusion, and you are only going to review the same judgment. You are only going to review the same conclusion. So basically, you have only formed a judgment, or you have only helped the client to form a judgment, and you are only going to review the same. You are only going to help the client to review the same. For example, you have only helped the client to make the accounts. You have only helped the client to make the books of accounts. And later on, suppose you are only auditing the books of accounts. You have only helped the clients in making the books of accounts, compiling the books of accounts, and later on you are only helping the clients to review the books of accounts. Later on you are auditing the books of accounts. That will create a self-review threat. That will create a self-review threat. For example, let us say you helped the client designing the internal control system. You helped the client in designing the internal control system, and later on you are only reviewing the internal controls. So self-review threat will be created. Self-review threat is going to be created. Understood? You have only provided some consultancy services to the client. You have only provided a judgment on something, and later on you are only reviewing the same. Self-review threat. Self-review threat. Clear? The other example, let us say, current year, Hiren is a auditor of the company. Previous year, sorry, Naren is looking like this. What sir has done with my name? So current year, Naren is the auditor. And previous year, let us say Naren is the doctor. Naren was the doctor of the company. Current year, Naren is a auditor of the company. Previous year, Naren was the doctor of the company. What will happen? Previous year, he was a doctor. He was involved in making the books of accounts. Current year, he is the auditor. He is only reviewing it. Self-review threat is created. What is created? Self-review threat is created. So self-review threats. Self-review threats. Self-review threats, it occurs during the review of any judgment or conclusion reached earlier. So earlier when you performed audit or earlier when you performed some other services, you only helped the client in forming a judgment or forming a conclusion. And now you are only reviewing the same. So there is a self-review threat that is being created. What are the circumstances that may create the self-review threats? That auditor of the company is also providing accounting services, management services, actuarial services, consultancy services, or a member of assurance team was previously a director or officer of that client. And when the auditor performs services that are themselves subject matter to audit. When the auditor performs services that are themselves subject matter to audit. For example, auditor is going to evaluate the internal control system. Auditor is going to evaluate the internal control system. And auditor is himself involved in designing the internal controls. So what is happening? Auditor is performing those services that are themselves subject matter to audit. Internal control system will itself be subjected to audit. An auditor is helping the client in designing the internal control system. Self-review threats. Then we have advocacy threats. What is the advocacy threats? What is the advocacy threat? Now, let us say what happens is that when we say about advocacy threat, let us say for example, you are the auditor of the company, and at the same time, let us say there is some case going on of the client with the income tax department. There is some case going on of the client with the income tax department, and it is pending in the income tax appellate tribunal. It is pending in the income tax appellate tribunal. The case is going on in the income tax appellate tribunal. The income tax department has to say that the client is involved in some kind of, some kind of manipulations and all. And you are fighting the case for the client. You are fighting the case for the client. Now what will happen? See, as a lawyer of the client, now you are acting as a lawyer of the client. You are acting as a lawyer of the client. You are advocating the client. If CA is allowed, he can defend his client before the income tax department. He can defend the client before the income tax department up to the income tax tribunal level. If the case is going on before the High Court, Supreme Court, then he cannot go because he's not a lawyer. But if the case is going on, in the income tax appellate tribunal, till that level he can go and fight the case for the client. Now suppose, let us say you are fighting a case for the client and you are only the auditor. What will happen? On one situation, as an auditor, you are supposed to neutrally point out whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement or not. And on the other hand, before the income tax department, you will be pleading, no, my client has done everything nicely. My client has done everything nicely. There are no material misstatements. So practically, what you are doing, you are only advocating the client before the income tax department. And you are advocating the client to such an extent that now your objectivity might get compromised. When you are only advocating the client before the income tax department, it will become very odd for you. Now you cannot point out the wrongdoings of the financial statement in the audit because you are only advocating the client. Let us say client has hired you. Client is bringing out an IPO. Client is bringing out an IPO. Client has hired you to, advocate, to promote the IPO. Client has hired you to promote the IPO. Now what you will be doing is you will be advocating or promoting the IPO of the client. What you will be saying to the public? Oh, the company is very nice. The company is earning profits. Everything is good in the financial statements. Please come and invest in the shares of the company. You will be earning nice profits. You are only advocating near the public. Then in that situation, if you audit the financial statements also, there will be an advocacy threat. That you are only advocating that the financial statement is very nice, this and that. Then in that situation, if you get anything wrong in the financial statements, it will be very, very difficult for you to point out. So that is the advocacy threat. So what is advocacy threat? Basically, you are promoting the client. You are promoting the client. And you are promoting the client to such an extent that your objectivity may get compromised. You are promoting the client to such an extent that your objectivity may get compromised. Two examples are given. First is promoting shares in listed entity on client's behalf. Promoted shares in listed entity on client's behalf. Second is acting as an advocate on client's behalf in case of litigations and third party disputes. Acting as an advocate on client's behalf in case of litigations and third party disputes. Now you see here it is not given, but it is understood that we can act as an advocate only up to the income tax appellate tribunal level. We cannot act as an advocate before the High Court. We cannot act as an advocate before the Supreme Court because we are not legal lawyers. Then comes the familiarity threat. So what is familiarity threat? You have developed a relationship with the client, a close relationship with the client. You now feel sympathy for the client. You now have that empathy corner for the client. You now feel that closeness with the client. For example, Naren's wife is a director of the company. Naren's wife is a director of the company. Now if anything goes wrong, Naren's wife will also be punished. And he has that love corner for his wife. He has that empathy corner for his wife. How can he point out something wrong where, his wife will also get caught? There is a familiarity threat. So what is familiarity threat? That you have developed a relationship with a client. You are being totally very sympathetic for the client. Let us say, for example, your family is a family of chartered accountant. Your family is a family of chartered accountant. From many years, you have been auditing a client. From many years, like from the last 50 years. From the last 50 years, you have been auditing your client. Earlier, your grandfathers used to audit. Then your fathers used to audit. Now you are auditing. And that particular closeness, that particular bondness will be there, From 50 years, you are auditing. Like, this is a real life example. Like, who is the auditor of Reliance? Chaturvedis and Associates. Who is the auditor of Reliance? Chaturvedis and Associates. Now, Chaturvedis and Associates, they have been associated with Reliance for so long, for many years. Like, my own student, I know particularly because, my own student currently is the partner of Reliance. He was my own student, Brijesh Chaturvedi. So, he is my own student, right? So, earlier, his father was there as the auditor of Reliance. Before that, his grandfather was there as the auditor of Reliance. And now he is there as the auditor of Reliance. Just imagine such a long relation. So what will happen? Familiarity threat. You drink tea together, you have snacks together, you visit each other's house. There is a nice relation. Familiarity threat can develop. Clear? Then, how else the familiarity threat can develop? Let us say your client is giving you expensive gifts. When your birthday came, your client gave you a Gucci watch. Right? Your birthday came, your client gave you a Gucci watch. Right? Yeah. Or maybe, particularly what happened is that your client is giving you spa treatments. Your client is giving you expensive gifts. Your client is giving you very nice hospitality. 5-star treatment. Go to any 5-star and stay. Will provide the expenditure. Your client is providing you VVIP treatment. What you will say? So much of love, so much of hospitality I have never received in my life. My client is giving me. You will develop a familiarity with the client. You will develop a relation with the client. A familiarity threat will develop. Clear? So when will the familiarity threat be developed? Four examples are given. First of all, a close relative of the audit team working in a senior position in the client company. A close relative of the audit team working in a senior position in the client company. So one of the partner of the firm, partner's relative is a director of the company. Partner's relative is the CEO of the company. Partner's relative is the CFO of the company. Former partner, now second point is very nice. Former partner of audit firm being a director or senior employee of the company. So what happened is that, let us say, you always share, people always share a very nice relation with our former gurus, with our former teachers. Normally that happens, that you will always share a very nice relationship with your former gurus, former teacher. Now let us say the old partner of your firm, the old partner of your firm currently is not a partner, but earlier he was a partner. Earlier he was a partner. He is a director or senior employee of the client. So you will be having that sympathy towards that person, no? That earlier he was in our firm, earlier he was a senior partner, we have worked together, I have learned so many things from him. You might develop that sympathy with him also. So even if your former partner is a director or senior employee of the client, then also there is a familiarity threat. Accepting gifts or preferential treatment from clients, company, directors, employees, there is a familiarity threat. And finally, long association with senior personnel, like I gave the example, there is a familiarity threat. Clear? And to remove this familiarity threat, in the Companies Act, a new concept has also come. That is rotation of auditors. To remove this familiarity threat, in the new Companies Act, a concept has also come. That is rotation of auditors. That if a firm is auditing the company for 10 years, if a firm is auditing the company for 10 years, there has to be a 5 years break. For 5 years, someone else will be appointed as the auditor of the company. And finally comes the intimidation threat. What is intimidation? Someone is threatening you. What is intimidation? Someone is threatening you. So the client is threatening you with something. The client is threatening you with something, and that is why you are not able to work objectively and you are not able to exercise skepticism. Client is threatening you with something, and because of that threat, you are not able to exercise skepticism. You are not able to work in an objective manner. So what kind of threat the client can give you? What kind of threat the client can give you? Will the client give you a threat? I will shoot you. No. Normally such a threat will not come. But yes, if you are doing the audit of Daud or something, if you are doing the audit of Daud or something, Daud Ibrahim or someone, yeah, if you are doing the audit of Daud Ibrahim or someone, then that threat can also come. Then that threat can also come. Right? So basically, what is the threat the client will put you in? What kind of threat will be there? The client will threat you. You will say, I'm issuing a modified report. The client will say, oh, you are issuing a modified report. Next year, don't show me your face. I'm removing you. I'm dismissing you. I'm appointing another auditor. Client is threatening you. If you issue a modified report, I will replace you with another auditor. Or the client is threatening you. I will reduce your audit fees. If you will issue a modified report, I will reduce the audit fees. Or client is threatening you. We will dismiss you. We will replace you with someone else. Or the client may threat you that will file litigations against you, will file cases against you, will file litigations against you, will file cases against you. Now you might say that, sir, if we have not done anything wrong, why should we be afraid of the litigations? Question might come in your mind that if we had not done anything wrong, why should we be afraid of the litigations? You know one thing, in India, how is the process of litigation? Once a case has been filed against you, it will go on for years. It will go on for years. And you know how a CA gets the work? CA gets the work based on his reputation. CA gets the work based on his reputation. Even if a client files false allegations against you, makes false complaints against you, ultimately your reputation will become bad. The reality will come out maybe after 1 year, 2 year, but till then you may lose many of your clients. So the client may also, threaten you with litigation. So these are 3 examples. Circumstances that can create the intimidation threats. So what are the threats? Being threatened with dismissal or replacement. Will remove you, will bring in someone else. Next is being threatened with litigation and being pressurized that will reduce the fees, right? So as an auditor, what we have to do, what we should do, we should take safeguards. If there are threats, we should take safeguard. If you are going out of your house and suddenly rain starts coming, there is a threat of getting wet, what you do, immediately carry umbrella. That is a safeguard. So when you are facing any threat of your independence being compromised, what you should do is take a safeguard. What you should do is take a safeguard. For example, you are holding the shares of the company, then before accepting the audit, dispose of your shares. That will become the safeguard. Yeah. If you are having any business interest with the client, then what you can do is you may impose a different audit, you may give a different audit team. That is different audit team we are providing, and in that audit team no one has any interest. That can be a safeguard. So the chartered accountant has the responsibility to remain independent by taking into account the context in which they practice, the threats to independence, and the safeguards available. So what the chartered accountant should do? First of all, auditors should ensure that are they able to audit in an independent manner. First of all, the chartered accountant should ensure that whether they can audit in an independent manner. There are 3 fundamental principles of independence: integrity, objectivity, and professional skepticism. Before accepting any work, auditors should consciously decide whether I can work independently or not. So before accepting any audit, auditor should take a conscious decision in his mind that whether I can